Now we'll go to James Davis and then Tracy Crouch.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, both. This may be going back over some of what you've already covered, but what are the main challenges in terms of developing diagnostics or vaccines in preparation for the next pandemic? So, Dr. Carmona first in terms of diagnostics.
So some of it comes from understanding the disease itself. I would say that is already being covered by having more sentinel sites. I would think challenging is understanding how can we use prior knowledge to be more responsive or be able to respond within this target. So if we understand the diseases in some kind of groups, are these viruses, are these bacteria, etc., and use that learning and platforms in a rapid way. What I mean here is, if you were to present with flu-like symptoms, do we have a test that can check for, let's say, coronaviruses, flu A and B, and RSV? These are just families of respiratory viruses that could all look the same. Those kind of things will remain a little bit challenging to produce at scale, but certainly doable. I think there's two other. One, around how we communicate and advocate for preparedness and, integrated medical countermeasures that are not going to be have a negative or catastrophic or apocalyptic kind of response from the public is important. And the other, of course, is a challenge is funding, right? We know that vaccines and therapeutics are understood as an effective tool. Diagnostics, sometimes it's kind of what's between the doctor and the patient, and the value of it in many countries doesn't have by the finance minister a line item that says these are diagnostics versus vaccine or therapeutics. So those could be things that we could work better and understand the value of this particular tool. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Yoon.
Yes, so I would echo a little bit of what Dr. Carmona mentioned, but I think global cooperation, making the whole system globally work well, is critical. So there may be individual pieces that are developed, but we have to make sure they're all coordinated. There's a lot of challenges to vaccine development, and maybe I'll just mention very quickly the 5 pillars of the 100 Days mission. One is vaccine libraries targeting different viral families to be all as expansive as possible in terms of the possibilities of the next pathogen that causes the outbreak. Extending as much as possible our networks of laboratories and clinical infrastructure. We want to try to promote immune markers instead of relying just on field efficacy studies. So markers that can correlate and be used much more quickly to correlate with effectiveness of vaccines. And then diversification and democratization of manufacturing itself. And finally, early warning surveillance systems. So those are the 5 pillars that I think address some of the challenges, component challenges. But overriding all of that, global coordination is critical.
Of course. Could we move on to vaccine technologies and platforms? Is there a particular, in your case, vaccine technology platform that's best suited to targeting disease X than others, do you think?
We are using a term that is relatively new and not completely harmonized across all audiences, but rapid response platforms. And essentially, platforms are vaccine technologies for which different pathogen targets can be joined as sort of a plug-and-play kind of format. And then rapid response indicates that can be done rapidly. So rapid response platforms are, in general, ideal technologies. mRNA has probably been shown already to have a lot of characteristics that would support that kind of rapid response platform role. There's still further improvements that are in the process of being investigated for the RNA platforms, but those are a critical platform. And then the other one I might mention that actually performed and played an important role during the pandemic is the adenovirus vector platform that was produced at Oxford and then developed by AstraZeneca. And that's another one. We just recently, CEPI recently signed a strategic partnership with Oxford to try to apply that for disease X purposes as also another option to RNAs. And we're still looking for other types of technologies in addition to those. We should not depend completely on one technology.
In terms of diagnostics, Dr. Common?
The principle is the same. So we developing molecular platforms or tests, it's quicker and achievable within that time. At principle level, abandoning technologies that have worked in the past, immunoassays, for example. So this is an equivalent to the adenovirus of the AstraZeneca example, have also proven to be effective. It depends on the use case and complex, multiplexing and, so putting many, remember the COVID line that you used to say you were COVID positive or negative. Sometimes we know that understanding whether it is influenza A or B or RSV or other, it's also trying to make these new technologies and address individuals in a syndromic way. In other words, presenting with flu-like symptoms is not good enough just to say it's COVID negative, because it could now be influenza and other of those kind of diseases that can affect us in a pretty detrimental way.
Understood. Now, we referenced before the need for international cooperation. How can that best be achieved, do you think, to the cooperation between governments, academia and business? Dr. Carmona.
So let me start with at a global level. So the role that WHO, the G7, G20 have in leading, it's critical. There's a pandemic treaty that it's hopefully going to be understood and addressed, because the value of those being able to be better prepared at global level with a tool like a pandemic treaty is essential. At domestic level or in the private part, let me address the industry is key to this. It's been understood well, AstraZeneca as an example, but the delivery, for example, of primary healthcare in countries that were better prepared to address COVID because of MERS, it's, for example, South Korea, how Indonesia, for example, is transforming their primary healthcare system. It's the role of non-state players in that space comes from the understanding that there is a return of investment that the private sector can contribute, not just in the social corporate responsibility type of approach, understanding industry in terms of manufacturing, transport of goods, and also other sectors, education. So I think it is the many of these that we, going back to lessons learned, perhaps, that it should be understood not just as a health problem, but other sectors of our daily lives. Did I cover your answer? I mean, your question?
Yes, yeah, thank you. And Dr. Yoon, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that we have to recognize that the different sectors and different types of organizations have different motivations and different roles to play, different strengths, different weaknesses. And so, for example, academia, they have a role in particular, for example, to do great research, exploratory technology development. Industry has a role. They're very good at certain things, but they're also motivated by certain things in order to actually sustain themselves. Yeah. And then governments have a role. They need to fill the gaps sometimes when other groups don't have that same capability or don't have that same incentive. And of course, the WHO and other international organizations have to actually play a convening policy type of role and provide some guidance. But I think it's really necessary to, again, understand that not everybody has the same sort of point of view, and come to it from all the different points of view and bring that all together.
Okay. Final question from me for now to Dr. Carmona. You mentioned previously that diagnostics are sometimes overlooked in terms of their importance. So do you feel that sufficient focus and resources are going into diagnostics in order to achieve the 100 days mission?
Is there sufficient funding? Is that
Yes.
going into diagnostics? Sorry, I did.
Yes, funding and general attention, really.
Definitely, we could do better on both, right? So, understanding the value of diagnostics, not just in pandemics, but also epidemics or even diseases that affect, malaria, dengue, etc., needs to be well understood. So that's how we communicate the value. It needs to come and be understood in different sectors for sure. We understand what let's say a pregnancy test can do, right? And the value and use case. It gets a little bit more complicated in other diseases, right? Screening, for example, and also maybe what we understood from COVID are the social sciences. So even if the test is completely free or free, willingness to our human behavior of understanding what the consequences of that result is something that and sorry, I didn't mention it earlier, it needs to be better understood, right? Because if we don't communicate the importance and the value of this, even when they are accessible and not used, it became a problem. The same with an equivalent to vaccine hesitancy, perhaps, and funding for sure. I think being better prepared for disease X requires funding the innovative sector, academia, primary health care services, and foundations that are driving this kind of agenda forward.
Thank you very much.
Very much indeed.